Consent, when a dream won't end at waking, you haven't escaped. It's just begun. Part 1. The Street of Shadows, Chapter 1. Rowan Street at dusk. Daniel Mercer walked home with the weather pressing down like a held breath. The air smelled wrong. Not rot, not smoke, something cleaner, fainter. Chalk dust. Rain-washed brick. A sweetness that didn't belong. The kind you smell only once in childhood, and again decades later in a dream. He paused by the row of terraced houses that had always been there, same porches, same council-installed lamps flickering half-heartedly in the rising dark. Except tonight they looked off. Stretched. As if the street itself had taken one slow step backward, waiting for him to follow. He blinked. Nothing moved. No wind. No traffic. Not even a barking dog behind the fence where that awful Jack Russell lived. Just the hush before the world reminds you it's real. He kept walking. Rowan Street curved gently downhill, a shallow bend that always felt longer than it looked. It should have taken him 6 minutes from the station. Tonight, it felt like he'd been walking for twice that, yet the last lamppost still hovered behind him. Unchanged. His phone buzzed. A single message. Abigail, got the project done. Mom said you'd ask. He smiled faintly, thumbed a reply. Proud of you. See you Friday, squirt, and slid the phone into his coat pocket. Then he heard it. A voice. Just one syllable. Not shouted. Not whispered. Spoken like it had been waiting. Daniel, he froze. There was no one on the pavement. No one across the street. No cars had passed in 10 minutes. The sound didn't echo. It just was. Daniel. He turned in a slow circle. That's when he saw her. She stood just ahead, not where the sidewalk should end, but in it. In the middle of the street, beneath a street lamp that hadn't worked in years. The light above her burned soft yellow, though he hadn't seen it flicker on. She was barefoot. Her clothes were tattered but not torn, shawls wrapped in layers, gray on gray, fraying at the hem. Her face was shadowed by a hood, but he could see her eyes. They were open far too wide. She extended her hands. In them, a crystal orb. He didn't walk closer. He didn't speak. Still, her arms remained stretched, unmoving, the crystal catching the light and sending it back in flickers. Purple, green, a shimmer of red like flame beneath water. It pulsed. Another voice echoed, not from her, but from everywhere at once. A chorus. Not words. Not yet. Just warning. He stepped back. The pavement gave slightly underfoot, as if he were stepping onto softened ground. Take it, she said. Her lips hadn't moved. He shook his head. The moment shattered. Not like glass. Like thought. The light from the lamp blinked out, plunging the street into gray dusk. She was gone. Daniel stood alone. His hands were shaking. He walked quickly, almost breaking into a run, but didn't look back. By the time he reached his front gate, the houses felt normal again. He closed the door behind him harder than he meant to. He sat in the kitchen 20 minutes later, coat still on, mug untouched. The house creaked in familiar places. The boiler groaned in the walls like a tired dog. Upstairs, the room he once shared with Claire still smelled of lavender and absence. He checked the locks. Twice. It had to be a stress dream. But he wasn't asleep. He'd seen her. And the way she looked at him, no, into him, wasn't something he could file under imagination. The kettle whistled. He turned it off before it screamed. He didn't drink the tea. It was nearly midnight when he remembered the shop. There hadn't been one. But when he passed her, or just after, there had been a doorway. He could swear it. He opened his phone's map app, dropped a pin at the point where he'd seen her. There was no shop listed there. No business. Just the side wall of number 42. Still, something about that wall itched in his mind. A blank brick face. A signboard with nothing on it. A bell pull without a bell. He closed the app. Then it buzzed again. No message. No caller ID. Just a file. Downloading. He hadn't tapped anything. The phone vibrated once. Downloaded, consent symbol.pdf. He stared at it. The icon was simple. Circular. A swirl inside a triangle inside a larger ring, drawn in shaky lines like it had been sketched in charcoal and erased, then redrawn again. He tapped the file open. The shape pulsed, like a heartbeat inside a lens flare. He dropped the phone. It clattered across the floor. For a moment, the kitchen lights dimmed. A soft static hummed in the wires, low and rising. Then silence. He picked up the phone with a tissue, suddenly irrationally afraid to touch the screen directly. It was blank now. The file had vanished. He searched every folder. Nothing. Daniel turned the phone off. He stared at the darkened screen. Then he whispered a name. Not his own. Not Abigail's. Jesus. In the bedroom, he lay under the covers, eyes open. 3:32 a.m., a soft knock came at the window. Not the front door. The window. On the second floor. He rose, body moving before his mind allowed it. Hands trembling, he parted the curtains. Nothing. But drawn on the glass, as if etched by a fingertip in condensation, was a single word. Consent. He blinked, and the word faded. He sat back on the bed. 3:33 a.m., his alarm went off. Except he hadn't set one. And in the corner of the room, where moonlight shouldn't have reached, something glowed faintly. A shape. A curve of glass. A crystal orb resting exactly where she had stood in the street. Waiting. Chapter 2, The Woman Who Waited. He didn't remember falling asleep. When Daniel woke, the sun was already up, pale and strained behind clouded skies. For a moment, he thought the events of the night had been imagined, something lodged in that thin membrane between dream and waking. But the feeling in his chest was still there, a quiet constriction, like his ribs had forgotten how to stretch. He sat up slowly. The orb was gone. No glow. No shimmer. No trace. Only the outline on the window remained, a faint smear, half erased, the word barely visible in the condensation. Consent. He pressed his thumb against the glass and wiped it away. It came off easily. Too easily. Something had been there. Something that didn't want to leave evidence. Or didn't need to. He dressed in silence. Downstairs, the house felt colder than it should. He ignored the toast, the coffee, the routines that made life manageable. He opened the front door, stepped into the damp air of Rowan Street, and walked back the way he'd come the night before. He needed to see it in daylight. The pavement was the same. So were the houses, the lampposts, the half-cracked curb he always tripped over. But that spot, looked different. Still. It had a memory now. Daniel crossed the road, stood where the woman had stood. He turned slowly, looking at every door, every hedge, every window. Then he saw it. A single white feather on the pavement. No birds. No wind. Nothing to explain it. He knelt. It wasn't a feather. Not exactly. More like a scrap of gauze, curled at the edges, woven so tightly it shimmered like ice. When he picked it up, it melted between his fingers. Not wet. Just gone. He looked up. There, across the street, was the blank brick wall. It belonged to the side of number 42, except now something had changed. A brass plate. It hadn't been there yesterday. He would have noticed. He crossed the road, cautious, already feeling the pressure return to his chest. The brass plate was polished but blank. No name. No number. Just reflection. And in that reflection, she stood behind him. Daniel turned. Nothing. Just air. But the pressure in his ears told him she had been there. Watching. Waiting. He called in sick for work. He didn't bother lying. He simply said he wasn't well. Voice flat. No elaboration. No teacher voice. His head of department sighed but didn't argue. Daniel had always been the quiet one. Reliable. Unremarkable. They assumed it was flu, maybe stress. No one imagined he was losing sleep over a woman no one else could see, offering a crystal that appeared in his house, in his window, in his thoughts. He opened his laptop and began to search. Dreams. Sleep paralysis. Crystal visions. Symbols in glass. He found forums. Message boards. Mostly rubbish. People talking about aliens, past lives, timelines folding. But a few stories sent a jolt through him. A woman at the edge of the road. Always the same. No matter the country. No matter the time. She appears near dusk, calls one name, and offers something round and glowing. Sometimes an orb. Sometimes a coin. Once a man in Ohio said she offered him a mirror. But always one thing in common, she never forced. She only asked. Consent. A thread buried in a paranormal archive traced the origin of the dream caller to 15th century Venice. Glassmakers. Ritualists. Believed to use molten glass to trap spirits. Crystals that shimmered when a soul agreed. The original term, scrawled in Latin, chilled him. Vocata somniorum, the one who calls dreams. Daniel closed the laptop. Stared at the wall. His phone buzzed. It was Nadia. Nadia Ashcroft hadn't spoken to him in nearly 2 years. She was his ex-wife's cousin, a journalist who once took an interest in Daniel's strange night terrors. After a few meetings, she'd chalked it up to post-divorce stress, maybe the side effects of anxiety meds. But her message now was sharp and unexpected. Nadia, did you see her? Daniel stared at the screen. Daniel, what are you talking about? She replied instantly. Nadia, the woman. Crystal. Rowan Street. It's always Rowan Street. He hesitated. His hands shook as he typed. Daniel, why me? There was a pause. Then, Nadia, that's what I'm trying to find out. That evening, Daniel walked again. Not because he wanted to. Because he felt compelled. As if the rhythm of the day was a tide pushing him back to that curve in the road. The air was heavy. He looked around. No sign of her. But she was near. He could feel her. That subtle thinning of the world. The faint flicker at the edge of vision. The sense that your thoughts were no longer yours alone. Then came the voice. Not aloud. Not from behind him. Inside. Daniel! This time he didn't flinch. He whispered back. Why me? Silence. Why are you calling only my name? The wind rose slightly. Leaves turned in circles on the pavement. One skittered toward him, paused at his foot. It bore a symbol, scrawled in soot-black lines. The same shape from the file. Circle. Triangle. Swirl. Then footsteps. He turned. And there she was. Closer than before. 10 feet away. Crystal in hand. Eyes locked. And she smiled. But it wasn't joy. It was hunger. He took one step back. She didn't follow. She simply waited. Watching. Still offering. Still asking. Chapter 3. Crystal in hand. Daniel didn't remember reaching out. One moment, the woman stood still, Crystal offered like a question. The next, he was inches away, his hand hovering above it, his fingers shaking. The orb shimmered in her palms, perfect, pulsing, neither hot nor cold, but thrumming with a rhythm his bones recognized and his mind refused to name. It called not with sound, but with weight. The pressure around them deepened, air folding inward, like standing in the eye of a storm made of silence. His heart beat faster, and with every thump, the crystal glowed brighter, catching the sickly orange of the street lamp behind her and fracturing it into strange hues. He should have stepped back. He didn't. His fingers grazed the surface, and for one breathless second everything stopped. A flash, the street vanished. He was no longer standing on Rowan Street. He stood in water. shallow, ankle-deep, warm as blood. Around him rose pillars of black stone, spiraling into a sky that churned like smoke. The water rippled with light, but it wasn't sunlight. It came from beneath, from under the surface, from something watching. "Daniel," a voice echoed, not hers, not his own. Other. 1,000 whispers in unison. Then he was in the crystal. Or it was in him. A vision unfolded. He saw himself, seated in his kitchen, cradling a steaming mug, but the mug cracked and his hands bled. He saw Abigail in her school uniform, walking alone, the sky above her bending at impossible angles. He saw his classroom, desks overturned, chalk words scrawled in a language no one taught. And then he saw a room. Stone walls. A fire pit. A man in robes. And the crystal, held in hands centuries dead. "Consent must be given freely," said the man, staring not at Daniel but through him. "Once offered, the bloodline is marked." The crystal in the man's hands pulsed. Then split. Not cracked, birthed. A second crystal formed inside the first, as if a soul had folded inward and become seed. Daniel staggered. Flashback on Rowan Street. Night. Cold. The orb fell from his hand. He hadn't even realized he'd taken it. It hit the ground with a sound like deep water. The woman still stood before him. But now she looked changed. Satisfied. Her lips moved, not a smile, not a threat. Just completion. "You've seen it now," she said. Her voice was real this time. Soft. Maternal. "Why me?" Daniel whispered, his voice hoarse. "Because you haven't decided yet," she replied. "Most people already have." She turned, walked away, and vanished. He stood there for minutes. Maybe hours. The crystal remained. It didn't glow now. It sat still on the concrete, dull and inert. He picked it up. Nothing happened. No visions. No pulses. No whispers. Just smooth glass. Cool to the touch. But he didn't drop it. He wrapped it in his handkerchief, shoved it deep into his coat pocket, and walked home like a man who had already seen too much to sleep again. That night he didn't dream. But Abigail did. "Daddy?" her voice said the next morning, trembling. Daniel woke with a start. She wasn't supposed to be there. It was Wednesday. She stayed with Claire until Friday. He rushed downstairs. She stood in the kitchen, hair unbrushed, in pajamas. Claire stood behind her, pale and shaken. "She walked to mine last night," she whispered. At 3 a.m. Knocked on the door. Said she couldn't sleep. That she saw someone. Daniel knelt. "Abby, sweetheart, what happened?" Abigail's eyes were wide, unblinking. "I saw her," she said. "The woman in gray." Daniel's mouth went dry. "In a dream?" Abigail shook her head. "No. She was outside. She asked if you were home." He stood. Claire grabbed his arm. "What is going on, Daniel?" He didn't answer. He just reached into his coat pocket and unwrapped the handkerchief. The crystal sat in his palm. Still cold. Still silent. But Abigail took a step toward it. Then another. She reached out. Daniel snatched it back before she could touch it. "Don't." She looked up at him. Her face crumpled. "Why not? She said it was mine." He stared at the crystal. Then at his daughter. Then at the hallway mirror, where for a moment he swore he saw the woman standing behind them all.